Is it changing?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, fine. Yes. I'm ready. Whenever you say, we'll start. Sharp 5:30. Shall we start?
Okay, sir. Sir, we can start. Around 50 participants have joined, sir.
Okay. So let's
So,
start. Let's start. No problem.
okay, sir.
Straight away. Okay. Yeah. Right. Fine. A very good evening, my dear students.
Good evening, sir.
I am Dr. Senthil Velu from KMC 1984 batch. I finished in 89. Then I finished my medicine MD in MMC 94, 97. So after that, I am at Erode practicing diabetes, internal medicine, critical care. Okay, in this tough COVID time, I thank KMC alumni, especially the office bearers and Prasad especially, and the students of KMC for having accepted this arrangement where online classes are being taken by the KMC alumni. I'm happy for that. And I thank for you to share 1 hour of your valuable time in listening to this topic, which as a final year student 2 decades back, diabetes was listed as one of the history, nothing more, nothing less. As it goes off in another 20 years down the line from 1990 to 2010, diabetes became the center stage. Till I finished my medicine, general medicine as well, diabetes was not concentrated more on the final year student as well as in the medicine PG exams as well as the discussion. They just highlighted the presence or absence of diabetes. But as all the studies came, the wide picture and the understanding of the various complications and the pathogenesis of diabetes involved and caused a lot of morbidity and mortality, diabetes took center stage. Like old saying, when we were all students, our medicine professors used to emphasize at every history and every examination and differential diagnosis, if you know venereal disease, syphilis, you know medicine. In another 30 years down the line from 1980 to 2010, instead of venereal diseases, diabetes became the central stage. Like when you know diabetes, you know medicine. Now we are going to see in another 30-35 minutes, which is not only a basics pathogenesis, which you have a lot of books. More than that, you have Google Assistant, where it will just vomit in a second, whatever you ask. So I'm not going to touch in detail about the theory part of diabetes. I'm going to give you a bird's overview of how diabetes is very important once you finish your final year medicine and go and work as an intern. So your actual interaction with the diabetic patient starts once you go as an intern. So then after that, as you finish your undergraduate and step into the postgraduate course, any field you take for that matter, like how all of you, all your seniors and postgraduates and all specialists are posted in COVID ward, all field of medicine, all field of specialty of subspecialty should know about diabetes, because unless diabetes is controlled well, all the treatment depends on the good control of diabetes. So this is a small theory of, it includes the magnitude of the diabetes problem. Diabetes term presently describes a metabolic and vascular syndrome of multiple etiology characterized by chronic hyperglycemia. Remember, it is not on one day like fever, like myocardial infarction. It doesn't happen in a day. Chronic hyperglycemia of more than few years with disturbances of carbohydrate metabolism, fat and protein metabolism, resulting from defects in its secretion of insulin and also the action of insulin, are combined together, both leading to damages in both small vessels, that is microangiopathy, and large vessels, macroangiopathy. This included all the magnitude of the pathophysiology of diabetes that is going to happen in a patient who has got diabetes. So this is just a history. Without history, you will not be able to understand and relate how diabetes is very important. It is not now. For the past 40, 50 years, we are talking about diabetes. The milestone starts way back in 1052, where BC, before Christ, that Egyptian papyrus described this. There are a lot of literature retrieved, followed by Ariatus in 2nd century AD, after almost 1700 years. He described the term diabetes. From then on, it is called diabetes. Our Indian ancient specialists like Charaka and Sushruta, 400, 500 BC, again, before they described about two types of diabetes. One is lean, another one is obese. Krisha and Stula, that is type 1 and type 2, which you should also remember that our great ancient physicians also emphasized, recognized diabetes, and they first described the sweet urine. That is why it is called diabetes mellitus, that is urine. Sweet urine, honey-like urine is due to glucose present in the urine. In 1986-9, they recognized that pancreas is the main organ that is dysfunctional, and then a German student discovers that pancreas islet cells, which are from the pancreatic juice, and then they later described that cells which contains no ducts and that produces insulin isolated from the juice, called islets of Langerhans in his honor. So Paul Langerhans, you remember, maybe sometime they'll ask in the MCQs. The pancreas again became much described and discussed and researched. In 1889, Oscar Minkowski and Joseph von Mering removed it from the healthy dog and then isolated that. And in 1901, Eugen Opie, diabetes mellitus is caused by destruction of islet cells. Again, he emphasized there is some damage in the islet cells which lead to diabetes formation. In 1920, Frederick G. Banting, he is an orthopedic surgeon. Remember, he is not a physician, then he is an orthopedic surgeon, recognized, identified from the physiology because he worked in physiology department at the time. And then he talked about pancreas, isolated this, and then presented to James MacLeod, which you're all reading, MacLeod's clinical textbook. So then he discovered and used it for clinical practice. So the diabetes magnitude problem is so wide, where the uncontrolled diabetes lead to end-stage renal disease, limb amputation, eye blindness, which can be preventable if you diagnose early and recognize the damages. And as of now, worldwide, 425 million adults are suffering from diabetes. In India, it is almost 77 million. So this 425 million worldwide, which is going to become 630 roughly in another 25 years. What about these complications in India? As you know, we have a wide populated area, varied educational, socio-economical status. Our healthcare system is very, very wide, and we have multiple level of approach. So all these complications are increasing, be it coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy. So almost all systems are involved when the control is not there. So with this basic epidemiology, the salient features you should remember is, among the diabetes involvement in patients, 85 to 95% of diabetes mellitus is type 2 diabetes. The explosive increase in prevalence is seen among the developing countries due to economical change, value-added services, and mechanization, where physical labor is reduced. And steady increase in this prevalence is also seen in developing countries. And type 1 is also slightly increasing. Previously, it was 1 to 2%. Now it becomes 5%. We don't have accurate data in our country because of paucity of its statistical presentation. And other forms, secondary diabetes, all you read in textbooks are very, very rare. The small difference between diabetes in India and in developed countries is, in developed countries, Western countries, where it occurs in middle and old age. Usually, diabetic patients in Western countries have overweight, obesity, insulin resistance. And even in children, because of obese children are on the high in the Western population, the worrying trend is much increasing type 2 diabetes in children. Whereas in India, if you see, it is a decade earlier. For example, if the diabetes presentation in US, UK, and Europe Australia is around 40 years. Here it starts in 28, 25 to 30 years. And majority of patients also you see type 2 diabetes in non-obese individuals. In children also we do start seeing because of our food habit change and more westernization in the living conditions. And Indian patients, diabetics, have more prone to develop cardiovascular disease in comparison to Western diabetic patients. Obviously, because our coronary arteries are much lesser in diameter compared to the thicker and wide bore blood vessels, coronary vessels in the Western population. So the chances of occlusion, which is diffuse, not at a single thrombus formation, is much more in diabetic Asian population. And also the microvascular disease like nephropathy, retinopathy are all comparatively lesser than the Western population. This data may be helpful for you to look at the MCQs solving your exam paper. Again, China number 114.4 in millions, India 72.9, US 30.2, Brazil 12.5, and Mexico 12. So again, if you look at this slide, maybe this color change is a little bit white. I did not change it after that. Marshall Islands has got the highest prevalence of diabetes among the population per ratio. For example, per 100 people, if you take 32.9% will have diabetes. That is the highest in Marshall. Then other countries follows. So this is a recent study in India undertaken and launched in 2017-18. Largest study across India, samples taken. The aim is to have a systematic random sampling method to obtain a representative sample of the country. So how the country has diabetes population as of now, occurrence, rate of occurrence, how the control is there, what are all the major complications. So all these things are analyzed. You look at the sample size, 1,24,000 have been analyzed across the country. And this 50% of people with diabetes are undiagnosed. You see, NGT is brown on orange one, that is 10. And 16% of diabetic population, 74% is non-glycemic, normoglycemic individuals. Then the central government has formed this national control of cancer, diabetes, that is non-communicable diseases, prevention strategies where they have used to find out screening of individuals whether they have symptoms or not above 30 years of age. So they have set up non-communicable disease OP even in all places, not only in teaching hospitals, in all government hospitals, primary health centers, so that access to the entire population of India. What about the awareness level in urban India? This is one study which was done in 2005, 9, and 10, where 25% of individuals have never heard of diabetes, remember. And among them, 60% do not know that diabetes can lead to organ complications. They simply think sugar is due to high sugar, you should avoid sugar, that's all. They don't know that uncontrolled diabetes lead to organ damage. More than 80% of the people in the study do not know what are all the risk factors for diabetes. 60% do not know that diabetes can be prevented. See, these two are very important. Number one, uncontrolled diabetes will lead to complications. We should impart this into our patients, into our general public. Your relatives, your friends are all potential candidates for developing diabetes sooner or later. So whoever you come across from now on, you also talk about this diabetes awareness program, where you should increase the awareness level of diabetes per se. So 100% of our people should know what is diabetes. And diabetes leads to complications. We should step up high from 60% to 90, 95%. And also every clinic, every opportunity we discuss, we communicate, we educate our patients that diabetes got a lot of risk factors. So one, if your uncle or aunt or your friend is a diabetic, we always call the patient's relatives friends to know about the risk factor and prevent diabetes. So 60% of people don't know that diabetes can be prevented. Yes, now you remember that diabetes can be prevented. My first lecture after MD completion when I went back to Europe started with this diabetes prevention program. In 2000 only, all the studies came that diabetes can be prevented. So what about the diabetes control now? The case of too little being done because of the wide population, various challenges we have. Only 20 to 30% of patients are in less than A1C7, which is significant good control. So other targets are very difficult to manage. Lipid control, BP control are suboptimal. That is, it doesn't meet the targets of the federation, national control program. All the key opinion leaders fixed that the HbA1c should be less than 7, like American Diabetes Association, Indian ICMR, and Canadian Diabetes Association. So all these are fixed the target, WHO. So we have to see the target and try to bring down the level of HbA1c, level of cholesterol, level of BP below the target level so that diabetes and hypertension will not cause much damage. And more than 50% of patients are not informed about glycemic targets. This is a big problem because of a busy schedule. Many physicians, many primary care providers, they don't talk about the significance of each test we are doing. Like when we do HbA1c, we have to tell them these are all the targets. Less than 6.5, very good control. 6.4 and below IGT. Up to 7, good control. 7 to 7.5, fair control. Above 7.5, very bad control, poor control. Like that BP, 130/80 normal. Like that, we have to tell the target to our patients so that they remember and follow. So as a primary care physician, once you become a doctor after another year, so you go to the society or to your intern in the teaching hospital, you directly see the patient. So whenever you see a patient with diabetes, what is your role? You have to provide quality diabetes care. So what are the quality you should have? Number one, the acceptability of the problem, you have to explain. Availability of the drugs, investigations, tools, all these things should be implemented. Affordability of the patient. We have variety of drugs, variety of insulin, so that we cannot put all to a particular patient. So the affordability varies according to the economic scenario of a particular patient. So we have to think how far they can afford to buy certain medicines. Like that, we have to categorize everything. If costly medicines are available after the patency is expired, they become less costly. So we should write those drugs which are benefited to our patients. A trained primary care physician is the best bet to tackle the diabetes epidemic in the Indian scenario. That's why we train all the primary care physicians, those government doctors in the primary health care as well as CGHS. So what is diabetes? You all know. So how dietary carbohydrate are major source in deciding about the diabetes over scenario. Carbohydrate forms the main source of energy, you should know. It includes simple sugars like glucose, sucrose, lactose, complex carbohydrates from starch in the vegetable source, and glycogen, which is stored in the stable form. Complex carbohydrates have to be broken down to monosaccharides if they have to be absorbed. That is the part of saliva, takes care from GIT, stomach, and goes to the intestines. So that's where digestion starts. Dietary carbohydrate becomes first incorporated with salivary amylase. Pancreatic amylase takes care, then breaks into oligo and disaccharides. Then intestinal disaccharidases in the brush border enzymes takes care, where the alpha glucosidase inhibitors act. That is a drug I have just mentioned for another training program. So monosaccharides are degraded, and then monosaccharides are absorbed in the villi. So this is a fate of glucose, where you all read from your biochemistry book. And then now a short recap. Glucose to all these happening leads into pyruvate, pentose, and glycogen. Glycogen is the one that is getting stored. And ultimately, this excess glucose is converted into fatty acids, other things. That is the reason for simultaneous increase in fatty acid level as well as the total cholesterol, lipids level, LDL, whenever the sugar is high, whenever the glucose is uncontrolled. All these happening, and whenever the physical need of the human body reacts, all these changes occur. That is adaptation of fasting. In a fed state, we take food that is assimilated, digested into carbohydrate, fat, protein, minerals, and vitamins. In a fasting state, that is when you go to sleep by 9 o'clock, you take your dinner, then you wake up at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock or 7 o'clock accordingly. So in this fasting state or pre-dinner, pre-meal state, what happens in our body? Whenever the glucose level is less, the glycogen that is stored in the liver mainly and then in the skeletal muscle are being utilized whenever the glucose level is less in the plasma. So exhausted in 18 hours of fasting. That's why in our Indian all religious follow up, they have fasting either at least weekly once, weekly twice, or sometimes 3 days, sometimes 1 week. Sometimes in month of Ramadan, they take fasting for 40, 45 days. So all these are aimed long ago to deplete excess glycogen and make the liver a better functional organ. So that's why we keep starving sometimes voluntarily. If we keep on eating more, all the glycogen is stored more and more. And triglycerides also have changed into energy source after 24 hours of fasting. The first 18 hours glycogen takes care of energy release, followed by triglycerides. So these are changes in the adoption of fasting we should know. That's why we don't allow people with diabetic to not to undergo prolonged fasting. Also, you students don't go for long fasting because your health will be derailed. Whenever you don't skip your breakfast, you are going in for almost night 10 o'clock to afternoon 1 o'clock, almost 17, 18 hours fasting you're on. Remember, you should take at least some meal or snack in between after once in 8 hours at the night. So morning you get up, take some light snacks too at least. Glycolysis promotes glycogenesis, promotes lipolysis. It's anabolic hormone in simple, so it all improves. So this is in the fasting state where insulin secretion is suppressed. So whenever there is no glucose entered, the insulin secretion is reduced. Whenever you eat, the glucose insulin starts secreting to reduce the glucose that is present in the plasma. Then glucagon epinephrine is secreted to have the counter-regulatory effect to produce more glucose in the fasting state. Then growth hormone and cortisol are persisting later. This is a newer mechanism of action that is recognized for the past 2 decades, where incretin is a hormone which you would have read in your physiology, and how it is useful in clinical practice is very important. So these are all the hormones that is present from the gut epithelium, and it enhances insulin production, secretion, and responsiveness. So whenever you take food, insulin is secreted from the islet cells through other mechanisms. But incretin specifically getting stimulated and secreted shortly and quickly whenever the food is consumed contains carbohydrate. That you must remember. So the naturally occurring incretin that is present in our body is glucagon-like peptide 1 and glucose-dependent insulinotropic peptide. So how this gut incretin responds to glucose is demonstrated in these 2 slides. Number 1, oral versus IV. First one is venous plasma, and the second one is C-peptide estimation in the incretin level. So when you took IV glucose, both oral green one and IV one remain same in the glucose level. Whereas the same thing you see from the method of introduction of glucose. The orange one is one, the bottom line, subdued one is where you give IV glucose and demonstrate the sugar level. Whereas the second green one, the peak one is the incretin hormone secreted in response to the oral glucose. When you see the glucose level, it is same in both. That is what in the left chart sees. So by this, they have demonstrated that whenever you take glucose or carbohydrate orally, incretin is released. Why incretin is useful and what is the role? After taking food, it goes to GIT, it activates GLP-1, GAP, and it is degraded after the required time of use as DPP4 enzyme, and that inactivates. So it is not needed for a prolonged time. It needs for a short time and gets its action and finished. The structure you all know, it is a 21 amino acids A chain and B chain 30 amino acids. And this is the structure of the islet cells in the beta cell. As a beta cell constitutes 60% of adult islet cell mass. The gene encoding pre-proinsulin is located in chromosome 11. That is a very important chromosome. Along with insulin, there is a C-peptide, that is the connecting peptide is released, and amylin is secreted. So this is how the insulin is acts on the cell to deliver the glucose into the body. Potassium channel is very important. That is being open. Calcium channel closes. Myosin filaments is contracted. Insulin is released through the GLUT2 receptor. So this is the ideal chart which you see of the response to the glucose load. It is biphasic. There is a basal low level insulin that is present in our body to take care of the pre-meal glucose requirement of all our tissues. Once you prepare for meal, that is before meal, it slowly starts increasing. That is a Pavlov's response. You think of the meal, think of your food, trying to eat, it slowly sets in. So the moment you take meal, at the time the peak first phase insulin releases, and it is ready for the glucose load getting inside the body to get mobilized to the cells. So after that, there is a second slow phase that occurs so that the residual glucose is slowly assimilated and entered into the system. Liver is again an important one, which organ which decides the resistance level and the glycogen storage level. Any glucose that is more than that stored is as glycogen. And whenever the insulin level is less, as in the case of deficiency or in the insulin resistant state, glucose senses that there is a less insulin, less glucose in the body, and glycogen storage is released into a pre-meal or fasting glucose entry into the plasma. So this is the role of adipose tissue. Again, free fatty acids is available to produce lipogenesis when the glucose is needed. If you remember this slide well, if you understand this slide well, the whole magnitude of the diabetes disease and its burden is thoroughly you remember, and you need not worry later. So this slide, this chart on the left side shows how previous to the diagnosis of diabetes, what are all the things happening in our system. So roughly 4 to 7 years before the onset of diabetes in any individual, the hepatic glucose production is neutral, that is the red line in the middle, followed by that brown line, that is the postprandial glucose level, which is slowly increasing in the impaired glucose tolerance stage, which you see in the bottom. So at the time of diagnosis, the impaired glucose from 140 slowly increases to 200. So when it crosses 200, we say diagnosis of diabetes. And the red line is insulin, where that red line is hepatic glucose production we have seen, and the yellow line is the insulin resistant, the red line, which is constantly present and increases as the diabetes becomes more active. And the purple line is the fasting glucose, which slowly increases, and once diabetes occurs, it becomes high, above 126. And beta cell function is yellow, where it is 100 7 years before. Slowly it comes down to almost roughly 50%. If you see the left side, 50 is there. So 50% insulin secretory capacity and function is reduced at the time of diagnosis. So the blue one is insulin level. It is normal at 0 7 years before. As IGT progresses, IGT when it progresses, whenever you are not doing proper exercise, whenever you become more obese, whenever your stress level is high, all these genetic factors again sets in along with that your family. So all these things lead to progressive insulin resistance, which the purple line simultaneously increases, which leads to more glucose utilization initially. And then as the insulin squeezing effect leads to beta cell decline, then the insulin deficiency simultaneously occurs. Insulin resistance lead to inefficient action of insulin per molecule. So all these changes doesn't happen in a day. All these development and progression of deformities or pathophysiologic defects happens inside the body for at least a decade, roughly 4 to 7 years, sometimes it's up to 10 years. So insulin resistance slowly happens, obesity slowly happens, and beta cell function slowly declines. Insulin level increases first, and then after diabetes diagnosis slowly decline, so that the insulin deficiency stage occurs. So these are all the reasons and how the various levels is defect present in an individual. When you look at them, when you treat them, decides what are all the drugs you are going to put for them. So this is the beta cell function decline, which you assess with HOMA beta and HOMA S score, where the beta cell function is assessed with the increased secretory capacity, and beta cell sensitivity is assessed by HOMA S. Sensitivity remains fairly well initially and increases after 6 years of diagnosis and then declines. Same thing for resistance. Beta cell function 50% at the onset of diagnosis, and every year roughly 5 to 10% declines. And at the end of 6 years, another 20-25% declines, and roughly 20% remains after 6 years of diagnosis. So put into another graph, like insulin resistance is due to obesity, genetic, low birth weight, again physical inactivity, some drugs, steroids and other drugs, low birth weight. All these leads to insulin resistance. Some specific gene defect also leads to beta cell defect. Along with that, excess glucose present, lipotoxicity, in-uterine defects, incretin defects. So these are all the various pathogenesis you should remember in this diabetes. So again, insulin resistance happens at the liver, happens at the muscle level, where it leads to reduced glycogen synthesis. So not much stored. So there is no storage capacity which releases whenever it's needed, like in fasting state. So that derangement leads to various complications later, also in the adipose cells. So what are all the conditions that induces insulin resistance? Number one, physiologically it happens in puberty and pregnancy. All the hormonal changes leads to stress state, physiological stress, and overweight, that is 10% above the ideal body weight. Obesity, BMI more than 25 in Indian condition, that is more than 15-20% of the ideal body weight becomes obesity. And all the endocrinopathies which you know common is Cushing's and acromegaly, and some drugs like steroid. Phases of insulin resistance, you know, first phase is first happens early, and that is getting demonized, followed by second phase worsening, where both occurs leads to fasting glucose high and postprandial glucose high. And the third level is insulin resistance remains same, but beta cell function declines, leading to fasting hyperglycemia. So what are the common clinical conditions that leads to insulin resistance correlation? When you see a person with overweight obesity, you think of insulin resistance. When a person has PCOS, young girls, PCOS is a marker of insulin resistance again, you remember. And also non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in an adult. Diabetes, dysglycemia itself, there is insulin resistant to some extent. And skin changes like acanthosis nigricans around the neck, darker pigmentation, and skin tags. Two are very important. So whenever you see a person in your friends, relatives, or your patients in your clinic, hospitals, you look for this acanthosis nigricans, that is a thick fold of skin around the neck, like a collar or a necklace, that depicts the particular person has got high insulin resistance. And skin tag also depicts higher incidence of insulin resistance. So these are all for measuring and proving that a particular person has got high insulin resistance. That is homeostasis model assessment, quantitative insulin sensitivity check index, quick index. So these are all measures which you know in your textbook, you know. So this is how the normal glucose secretion that is present, and how type 2 diabetes differs. What you see in the first early peak, first phase, and then the second phase is altered in the type 2 diabetes. The early first phase response is reduced or completely reduced, and second phase is further delayed. These are all the salient features of beta cell function defects. That is, pulsatile secretion of insulin is lost. That is, the first phase and second phase is lost. There is slow really increase in first phase and subdued prolonged second phase. High amounts of proinsulin and insulin split products are seen. Abnormal gene expression and transcription, beta cell apoptosis. This is the widely gained newer concept for the past 15 years, that beta cell apoptosis due to various reasons. It is a very, very sensitive cell, islet cell. So any small change in the glycemic level and the oxidative level stress level in the human system, any sudden stress due to other diseases like severe sepsis or any MI, stroke, all these general systemic affection also leads to beta cell apoptosis. So glucotoxicity is where there is excess glucose present leads to diminished insulin secretion. That's why whenever you see a patient of more than 400 calories, we signify and write in present is not sufficient to act. Chronic hyperglycemia leads to depletion and deformity. Lipotoxicity also, circulating free fatty acids is very high. That also disturbs the insulin conversion. So now the important question is whether which is first, insulin resistance or beta cell defect. So this is a real chicken and egg situation. You ask somebody, they say beta cell defect is first initially when we are all putting into theories. Then insulin resistance came into another theory. But by and large, both are simultaneously occurring. Like chicken first or egg first is the one just to kindle you interest. Whereas now, after all this discussion in 2009, Rudolf Defranco is a man who is totally analyzing, researching on insulin resistance and its effect in our body for the past 30 years, American endocrinologist. So he has proposed this octet instead of three defects, basic defects in diabetes like insulin secretory defect in the pancreas, fatty acid changes in the liver, skeletal muscle deformity. They put 8. That is, liver is altered, insulin secretion is reduced in the pancreas and skeletal muscle. Along with that, gut, where decreased incretin, which we discussed now, is reduced, is one of the reasons. Then lipolysis, that is adiposity deformation, is another aspect. Kidneys, where increased glucose reabsorption leads to pathophysiological uncontrolled diabetes state, followed by neurotransmitter dysfunction in the brain. All these factors leads to 8 reasons for pathogenesis of type 2 diabetes. So genes are many important, many genetic heterogeneous deformation is there. Common forms of type 2 diabetes are polygenic. We cannot put it into a single gene defect, whereas strong gene-to-gene interaction and gene-environment interaction plays a major role in developing diabetes. Only one exception, there is only maturity onset diabetes, that is a single gene defect in chromosome 11. How the environment reacts. Sedentary lifestyle, number 1. High consumption of fat and calories, lack of physical activity, stress, depression. So all these are very important hypotheses leading to various factors that causes insulin resistance and occurrence of diabetes sooner. So these are all the interactions between beta cell dysfunction and insulin resistance. Basic defect is insulin hyperinsulinemia. Normal glycemia is trying to be restored, so insulin level is increased to produce more glucose level, and then beta cell is squeezed. Insulin resistance leads to decompensation, inadequate response, so beta cell function is declined sooner within 4 to 5, 6 years. So along with the genetic environment acts. So all these things leading to demand, decompensation. So the compensatory happening, that is happening in the initial 4 to 7 years of IGT or development of type 2 diabetes leads to diabetes. Hello, meeting like a So type 2 diabetes, major defects we already discussed. How the peripheral insulin resistance, the muscle and fat is important. How the liver takes care of the insulin resistance part, and how the dearrangement at the glucose output, glucose uptake, utilization, and VLDL production. That is, the fatty acids dearrangement also occurs whenever there is excess insulin is present and fatty acids. Liver takes the insulin resistance reaction, leads to further insulin deficiency. So this is just a gist how the diagnosis of diabetes is very important. As a final year student, you should know only the diagnosis definition. To talk about the diagnostic methods, laboratory values, or all take another 2 classes. So fasting plasma glucose more than 126 is defined as diabetes, or 2-hour postprandial plasma glucose of more than 200 after OGTT of 75 grams of glucose dissolved in 300 ml of water taken after 2 hours of taking a meal, glucose, or A1C above 6.5. This is performed in the lab with a qualified and standardized DCCT assay. That is certified assay. Lab equipment is very important. In a patient with classical symptom of hyperglycemia and or hyperglycemic crisis, a random plasma glucose of 200 and above is enough, because as we have seen already, diabetes type 2 slowly occurring. There is no classical symptoms of polyuria, polydipsia, weight loss, the presence of infection, sweating or tiredness, all present to diagnose type 2 diabetes. It is not so, which we were all taught in our undergrad teachers in 1986-87. Now, we do know that insulin resistance, metabolic problems are all there in any high-risk individual. To check fasting and postprandial sugar level, if it is slightly above the normal level, you have to subject them for oral glucose tolerance test plus HbA1c to diagnose diabetes mellitus without symptoms. Suppose a patient comes to you with increased thirst, weight loss, frequent urination, any infection or numbness, burning, blurring of vision, all these classical symptoms are present with the family history, then even a casual plasma glucose of 200 qualifies that that particular person has diabetes. Okay, just to kindle your interest, so far we have seen majority of clinical implication, what is our diabetes burden, how the epidemiology in India is there, Western world, a small 3 case studies to kindle your interest and remember. If you are sure of answer, you can unmute and answer. A 52-year-old man comes to you with blood glucose values of 198 and 362 milligram, fasting and postprandial state respectively. So far, he is not known to have diabetes, and it's discovered to have these values on a routine health checkup. Right? This person, because he is 52 years, he just go to the hospital or a lab, get checked himself. Because I'm 52, I don't have any symptoms. I want to check my sugar because I want to know whether I have blood glucose or not, diabetes or not. So this is the random check. So is the values are normal or high? Definitely these two values are high in the diabetes range. Very good. So just all the listening part gives you this answer. What proportion of patients with diabetes are unaware that they have the condition?
60%.
Okay. Any more answers? More than 50%, roughly. They don't know that they have diabetes. Very good. Then, what symptoms can alert one to the presence of diabetes? Yes, the classical symptoms, you know.
Polyuria.
That has to alert. But many times they do not have. Just you can ask this person whether you. Sometimes they have small fungal infection, some dysuria. They can correlate. How common are these symptoms? Still very rare. Not all will have the classical symptoms. What complications of diabetes can a patient have at the time of first diagnosis? Okay, you know, already I've charted few. What are the complications they have? Be it coronary artery disease, be it peripheral vascular disease, end-stage renal disease, that is nephropathy, then retinopathy, neuropathy. Yeah, all these things are rare. What complication diabetes person can have at the time of first diagnosis? Anything. Sometimes patient comes with visual disturbance, retinopathy, undetected high blood sugar of 198 and 362, or sometimes burning feet, or sometimes urinary tract infection, some dysuria or fungal infection of the vulvovaginitis or fasciitis, balanopasciitis. All these things are common. Sometimes they'll come for that complication to a surgical OP or a urology OP or a gynec OP. When you do a casual blood test, sorry, then you will know that particular patient has got high sugar. Then they'll be referred to a diabetic clinic. This is the second case study. So these are all just to say, don't think that when a patient feels healthy, when a patient feels no symptoms, asymptomatic, It doesn't mean that you don't have diabetes. This is an 85-year-old man with diabetes for 42 years. Yes, he is evaluated. He comes to your hospital for a routine treatment. You are very happy to see that he has no abnormal complications like any other symptoms like neuropathy or cardiac failure or end-stage renal disease or retinopathy. What do you think?
Controlled diabetes.
Excellent. So can an individual with diabetes enjoy a normal life? Why we have put this study is, don't think that all diabetic patients are will be suffering and will not have a normal life, normal quality of life. We aim to give a good quality of life, productive life, symptom-free life, illness-free life once you diagnose diabetes and have a good control. That is why I have put this slide as even an 85-year-old gentleman who has got a 42-year long history of diabetes, whom if he properly attends the clinic and adheres to your consultation and recommendations and advices, if he follows good diet and exercise, and if he controls his sugar level between 120 fasting and 160 postprandial, A1C less than 6.5, he will not have big chronic diabetic complications. It doesn't mean that they'll have subtle complications. They'll have neuropathy. Sensory neuropathy will be there. Prostatitis will be there. Cataract will be there. Mild retinopathy will be there. But he doesn't have a serious complications evidence. So still he have a good normal life. So can diabetes complication can be prevented? Yes, totally you can prevent. So this is again, 64-year-old lady evaluated for diabetes and its complications. She has diabetes for 16 years. She is found to have fasting and postprandial glucose values of 108 and 146 respectively. A1C is 6.8. However, further evaluation reveals the presence of proteinuria, that is presence of albumin, macroalbuminuria in the urine, and moderate non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy.
Controlled diabetes with mild complications.
Yeah. So the question is, why should this patient with apparent good control of diabetes develop complication?
So maybe the
நான் மீட்டிங்ல இருக்கேன். ஒன்னும் இல்லையாப்பா? சரி நீ கிளம்பு. Yes, tell me.
maybe the complications set in before the person started controlling diabetes.
No. What we have seen in many studies are UKPDS and DCCT study, international studies, that those patients, meeting those patients who have been diagnosed early at the onset of disease, who have been controlled very well right from the onset of disease to another 5 years, 6 years intensively, will not have major complications later. That is the legacy effect. That is why in the elderly individual, in the previous case study, we saw 82-year-old gentleman, 42 years of diabetes, 85-year-old man, no complication severely. Whereas this in lady, 65 years, diabetes for 16 years, now the sugar level is 108, 146, A1C 6.8. But at the initial period of diabetes, her sugar level was not that controlled. She had high A1C of 9, 9.5 for 5, 6 years or 8 years. So after a reasonable period of 8 years, then she was counseled well, treated well. Then she brought down her sugar level to 108, 146, A1C 6.8. So when a patient's initial period of 6 years or 5 years not in good control, even though they control later well, the chances of getting complication are much, much earlier. Okay, is it understood? Because that the memory effect in the insulin secreting cells and the tissues are present. So as soon as the glucose is high, You control well with good drugs, lifestyle changes, exercise protocol, dietary changes, all if the patient adopts and bring down sugar very well, and the same level she continues for another many years, the insulin secretory defect is prevented, apoptosis reduced, a reasonable good control, initial period of first 2 to 3 years, at least maximum 6 years, will have many years postponed of all complications. So what determines whether a patient develops diabetes complication or not? Especially
Early
tighter control, early diagnosis and early control right from beginning. So this is the reason. After all these investigations and interrogation of the patient says diabetes had been poor for the first 5 to 6 years. Only recently the control is good. He is also having uncontrolled hypertension. This is a DO. When diabetes itself is a very problematic one. After a few years of diabetes occurrence, so many 50% of diabetic individuals will develop hypertension associated, and 2/3 of hypertension individuals also will have diabetes later. So these are all the common DO. This is one of the tricky case scenario you should remember, and you can go back leisurely and learn in your textbooks and Google. Case A is one where you see 9-year-old boy. Case B is 12-year-old girl. Case C is 15-year-old girl. Case D is 20-year-old girl, man. If you look at the fasting sugar level in all the three is above around 200, 208, 196, 205, 234. If you look at the postprandial also, it's very high. All the four above 300. 342 in first 9-year-old boy, 320 in 12-year-old girl, 321 in 50-year-old girl, 398 in a 20-year-old man. When you look at the A1C also, 10.1, 9.8, 9.9, 10.2. So the challenge is, like this, we do have many patients in our OPD. One patient will come like this, 9-year-old. The next day, 12-year-old will come. The same day, evening, 15-year-old will come. 2 days later, 20-year-old man will come. So these 4 young patients with similarly high plasma glucose levels are present. What do you think? Do they all have the same type of diabetes?
No.
If no, what are they suffering from?
Based on therapy, we can categorize.
Sorry?
If there is the
Based
response
on?
is therapy, sir.
I don't clearly understand. Based on?
Based on treatment, sir. If we give
No,
insulin,
treatment, okay. That is all trial and error method. That is what many clinicians are doing. So as a scientific person, as your science proves you with some tips and indicators, we have guidelines, we have protocols, we have tools to decide these 4 cases are different or not.
Sir,
We all agree that, yeah.
to diagnose it as type 1 diabetes mellitus, we can check for autoantibodies in their blood, sir.
For
Because
example,
in recently the diabetes.
tell me the autoantibodies test. What will you do?
Sir,
If you know. Otherwise, don't worry. Yeah, autoantibody test we can do. One is anti-GAD antibodies.
glutamic acid decarboxylase is the
Yeah,
most
that's
potent
what,
antibody.
yeah, that we can do.
Now, islet cell
Okay.
antibody.
Okay. Yeah, islet cell we don't normally do. We do only anti-GAD. That is fair enough. That is got very good specificity and sensitivity. You can diagnose. The cost is around 3,000. So this 9-year-old boy's parents are willing. You are doing. Suppose the 12-year-old girl parents are not that much affordable. They say, no, I can't afford now. You treat us. That's what they say. Number 1, you can do autoantibody test to diagnose whether a particular individual has got type 1 diabetes or not. Okay. Second test is?
C-peptide assay, sir.
Excellent. C-peptide assay. You do C-peptide, one test or two tests? Two samples or one sample you advise?
Two samples.
Excellent. So what time you specify? One is fasting. Definitely. You should ask fasting sample number one. And postprandial is 1.5 hours after starting to take meal. Always remember. So when a patient is starting to take meal, you note the time, and after 1.5 hours, you check for C-peptide because insulin starts secreting from the time of you think of a meal, Pavlov's effect, salivary action starts. So it prepares your body to digest, takes the glucose from the gut. That is the fast insulin first level secretion. This is the second test, insulin C-peptide, and the levels you read from the book. Remember those levels. What is the normal C-peptide fasting level? What is the postprandial? So, for example, you have 1 millimole. How much insulin the particular patient secretes? Will you also estimate serum insulin level? Right, that you read, okay? Because for every insulin molecule released, one C-peptide is released. So both are equal. If you estimate C-peptide, which is much stable, much quality-wise you can assess. So the C-peptide directly relates to the insulin secretory level in a particular body. This is the number 2 test. So now you take case A. A 9-year-old boy presented to the hospital with the classical symptoms of polyuria, polydipsia, polyphagia, tiredness, abdominal pain, and burning micturition. What further history will help you to diagnose diabetes? So he's got all classical symptoms.
Whether he has a family history of diabetes or not.
9-year-old boy.
Sir, whether he has family history of diabetes or not, sir.
Okay, that you ask. That is the third question you can ask. What is the first question you ask? How long does it have? Is it acute or chronic? Because type 1, even though it happens within a few weeks, suddenly it manifests. So the patient who has got type 1 diabetes is brought to the emergency always as an DKA, diabetes ketoacidosis. Okay.
Okay.
So this is a classical type 1 diabetes, that is case A. What about case B? The 12-year-old girl, fasting is 196, postprandial is 320. Yes. So she had been diagnosed to have type 1 diabetes. Naturally, young girl, she was diagnosed type 1, started giving insulin. Now she is on insulin. Even with insulin, she is not under good control. Even after 6 months of diagnosis of type 1 and on insulin, her sugar level is not in control. HbA1c is not in control. What do you think?
Modi, sir, Modi.
Probably, maybe number 1, Modi. So to ascertain Modi, what will you ask? Modi is maturity onset of diabetes in young. What one single question will differentiate between Modi and type 2 diabetes?
Sir, whether she has a family history with complications or without complications.
Family history. No problem about complications.
Okay.
So family history of how many generations? 1, 2,
Oh, no, sir.
3. The generation of symptoms should be present at least 3. For example, if this girl, if you think of Modi, her parents and grandparents should have been suffering from diabetes. All right?
Okay.
That is, then only you can say Modi. Otherwise, if the child is obese, no history of family history, this may be type 2 diabetes. Don't think that 12-year-old will not have diabetes. Even from 10 years, we started seeing type 2 diabetes now. That is why this case has been demonstrated here. So you start on glipizide and metformin, she will do very well. That is the treatment part later. So second child has been diagnosed to have type 2 diabetes. What about third one? A 15-year-old girl, fasting 205, postprandial 321, HbA1c is 9.9. She has diabetes from the age of 13 and she has history of recurrent boils on her neck. So she was treated with infection and then UTI. At the time of interrogation again, she gives a family history of diabetes in her parents as well as grandparents. So obviously this is
Type 2.
Modi.
Okay.
Two generation of family history of parents and grandparents depicts Modi. So she will do very well with the oral drugs, very well, compared to insulin and drugs. So when you look at the case D, he is a 20-year-old man. Again, sugar is 234, 398. A1C is 10.2. Here, what is his history? He has recurrent abdominal pain, and he has history of passing oily stools on and off. No family history of diabetes. He doesn't smoke. He doesn't consume alcohol. He was put on oral anti-diabetic drugs for the past 2 years after diagnosis of diabetes as type 2, lean individual, but his control is not there. So what will you think diagnosis of this case D? That is the fourth person.
Pancreatitis, type C.
Pancreatitis, of course, but there is no acute symptoms of pancreatitis. Then we have to look at the surgical opinion also. Any pancreatitis should be acute, sick, emergency condition. Here is a patient who has got stable for 2 years of his clinical presentation of diabetes, who is casually working and taking care of himself. He is not too sick. He doesn't have any severe acute abdominal progressing pain. If it is a pancreatitis, it would be very severe. Abdominal distension, tense. He cannot walk. He cannot sit.
So latent
Here he
autoimmune.
has got recurrent abdominal pain, sometimes mild, and the clinching diagnosis results on the passing of oily stools. So you are nearing to the diagnosis, but complete it wisely.
Sir, tumor of
And we are going
pancreas.
to put, oh, excellent tumor. Oh, you've gone beyond. You are going to threaten your patient about tumor. So clinically, tumor will be the last one. You have all other
Stones
investigations
from
later.
CBD.
Alcoholic status.
I said he doesn't have any history of alcoholism. He is smoking. So here is a patient who has got recurrent abdominal pain that signifies there is some pancreatic exocrine deformity. I agree, he has got some defect, but it is not pancreatitis acute. Maybe chronic, recurrent, calculus pancreatitis. You get it?
Okay, sir.
That is called FCPD. Okay. Familial calcific or recurrent calcific pancreatitis, secondary diabetes. So the clinching diagnosis is before doing all investigations, oily stools complaint. So whenever a person has got oily stool, his fat is not digested by the pancreatic enzymes. That is why he is passing oily stools. He is not having normal weight gain, lean, uncontrolled diabetes, because you have to take care of the pancreatic replacement. You have to take care of his insulin deficiency state along with his pancreatic exocrine deficiency. So you have to supplement with good amount of insulin initially, then evaluate thoroughly. Right? Get it?
Yes,
So
sir.
what other investigation that will help you to see your FCPD, that is calcific pancreatitis?
ERCP, MRC.
High-end costly investigation. நீங்கெல்லாம் பெரிய கார்பரேட் ஹாஸ்பிட்டல் ஆரம்பிக்க போறீங்க. Only ERCP,
US
MRI,
abdomen.
MRCP. Simple
X-ray, sir.
basics. See, you
Yes.
when you see a patient first time, when the patient is not sick, he has been treated for 2 years. He doesn't have obviously sick symptoms. He is not asking you, do somebody to save me. He just is simply sitting in front of you. And your task is to diagnose. So you at least recommend a simple chest X-ray abdomen. And if you want to help your radiology friend, do an ultrasound abdomen. Okay. So in a plain chest X-ray abdomen, you will see calcific opacities and the pancreatic distribution in the back. Okay. All the calculus will be nicely seen in a plain X-ray. Or if your patient insists, you can also do an ultrasound abdomen along with pancreas X-ray abdomen erect. Right? So these are all the three interesting cases what you have seen. So this will help you to remember all high blood sugar, all young ages are not type 1. Type 1, of course, is there. You should also try to rule out type 2, maturity onset for diabetes in young, which is not so rare as we thought 20 years back. Now another 20 years, second generation, third generation started appearing. And also calcific pancreatic disease. So secondary pancreatic disease is also common. So if time permits, we can have further discussion about diabetes investigations, follow-up, and then drugs, oral drugs, insulin. If time permits later with your representative and the other team, I can discuss. So these are all very important. All your acquaintances, be it your friends, relatives, your friends, father, parents, your parents, and your cousins, wherever you go in your community, wherever you see anybody who is obese, inactive, when you interact after some time, or when you see patients also, those patients, family members, and their relatives, you can always educate, make them aware that diabetes is a very silent disease for a decade. If you pick up in the impaired glucose tolerance stage itself, you can diagnose even before the patient manifests as diabetes. You can pick up early, prevent diabetes. It's a very, very important aspect. As a young final year undergraduate student, you should remember this. Then you take it to your internal and then further practice. So during your practice, you should learn to monitor diabetic patients. That is very, very important. Even though you have a lot of tools, lot of data management, electronic medical records, many times it is difficult to monitor as per the protocol always. So always you try to take some time to look at the records, review. Every 6 months once you ask the patient, what are all the tests done? So we have standard tests at the first visit, once in 3 months, once in 6 months, and once in a year. So these are all the very important aspects you can learn from your textbooks, and then we can discuss later. Always first visit, you ensure that a particular patient is diabetic by seeing the fasting glucose level, postprandial glucose level, HbA1c. If above 35 years, do a lipid profile and renal function, urea, creatinine, urine complete. Once in 3 months, you have to do again HbA1c, fasting postprandial, sugar level. Once in 6 months, lipid profile, creatinine. Once in a year, eye checkup and foot care. All these things are very, very important. This is a small video I put all in my diabetic educational program for both patients, general public, and my friends, doctors in those days. Now I'm going to put for you a 50 seconds video. That's all. Okay. So this is what was very catchy and started practicing in 2001 onwards, where this is very, very important that when you start threatening your patients about diabetes, no, you have to do 1 hour exercise, you have to strictly follow diet, you have to do this, that, come for regular checkup, spend so much of rupees, you have to follow medicines. If you do that, they will stop doing it, they will look like this. What you see here, you see? Yeah, you will go on bombard like this, and one day you will knock yourself and see the plate, very, very small portion, and do exhaustive exercise, he is unable to follow. Be practical. So you do some physical activity at home and walk whenever possible. 30 minutes of exercise at home and healthy food. Yeah, this is very, very important, where you have to be practical. The diet should be a major part, along with the understanding of the diet proportions, exercise protocol according to the age and the limitations and the comorbid conditions. It is not a uniform advice we give for all. A young individual with 30 years diabetic, 40 years diabetic can do severe exercise, both treadmill, walking, swimming, all. Whereas skipping, at 55 years you start exercise, you go for a small walk. If he has comorbid conditions, unstable angina, be careful, avoid all these exercises, do some simple exercises, walk a little bit. If he has ONE, then again he cannot walk. So like that, there are so much of limitations our patient has. Right. So these are all about the basics approach and the clinical case discussions. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All the best.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.